Okay, there we go. We should be recording live in studio.
Well, it's not live.
Live in studio. Uh, Chris and I were going back and forth on what housing prices have looked like in the United States over the last 50 years and what
hmm
the real cost is. Um, this was inspired by what was the thread?
It was like an r/economic collapse or something.
Okay. I'm gonna open that up. Um,
I can read the headline because the title of the post makes me laugh. The title is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's "Do people in the U.S. connect that the country is actively collapsing? What are you seeing in your community?" So definitely a pretty heavyweight title right there. And obviously, there's lots of different comments under the post, but a lot of it resonates around like, oh, things are worse today than they used to be, and like this trend is accelerating.
right. So the post reads, do people in the US connect to that the country is actively collapsing? What are you seeing in your community? What's the vibe check? Have you spoken to anyone about this? I've been told I'm being overreacting, or I am overreacting slash hysterical. This is mainly when I talk to elders or people over 50. I guess I'm just wondering how people can't see it at this point, but I might be more blah, 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 blah. What was the funny, there was a funny part. Oh yeah.
Pattern recognition.
I Also, I have pattern recognition that generally others can't see or feel. That's funny. Okay. Um, so in here somewhere there was a comment about housing. Was it this one that inspired you, Chris?
I think there were a lot of comments that were kind of all on the same topic, which is like, oh, um, housing is unaffordable for people of our generation, and that is a microcosm for other aspects of life, right? Like the stock market's overvalued, like houses are overvalued, like all this stuff.
Yeah. So if you're over 40 and you bought a house 10 years ago and you have a decent career, you are fine. Gas and groceries are higher, but your salary is also higher. If you bought your house in 2015, maybe you paid 350K for a house that would sell now for 500K. It's all the below 30 people and the renters who are screwed. A house is min 400K for a small house, and rent is at minimum 1,500 a month. It's also tough to find an unskilled job that pays more than $16 an hour, can't afford rent, a $500 a month car payment, and groceries on top of that. But if you are over 40 and make $35 an hour, it's much easier. So for young people, the country is collapsing. For older people, it's just expensive. Um, your perspective here was essentially like, let's go look at the actual numbers, right?
Yeah, I think at a high level, my perspective is, people have a bit of rose tinted glasses in the past, and like housing has always been expensive, and sure houses were cheaper back then, but like interest rates were higher, like other costs associated with it were high, um, and that some of the pain may just be that these are people young in their careers, maybe during a slight economic recession or something. So it's like it feels expensive, but like historically, it's not really out of line. I think was my high level take. I was also kind of baited, John, by you in chat, where you responded to me, like, so in the context of me saying like in general, Americans' lives are better today than they were 20 or 50 years ago, and you were like, I generally, and I'm paraphrasing you, but you said I generally
Let me
agree.
read my comment exactly
Sure,
as I
sure,
said it.
sure.
I
Yeah.
said, um, so you said, uh, by most metrics, Americans' lives are better in nearly every way, even compared to 20 years ago, let alone 50. And my response was, I have been told this is true for basically all metrics except housing, which is by far the highest expense for most Americans. Doesn't really matter if fast food and dishwashers are cheap if you can't afford the roof. Mostly vibes, though, haven't crunched any numbers. So that's what I said. And I think that accurately reflected my take here. Yeah, so I baited you with that comment. Then, um,
And then we went down a deep, deep rabbit hole where we just lost our entire afternoon kind of looking into this. But I'm curious, before we talk to Austin about like what we went down and like what we looked at, I'm curious on Austin's high level take on like this concept and just this Reddit thread in general too.
Yeah. So, I mean, my understanding, I know evidence is key. I think knowing the facts would be helpful, but like anecdotally, people from our generation have experienced what they believe is a housing crisis, that houses are too expensive these days, that salaries have not kept up with housing prices, that young people are worse off in the realm of real estate compared to previous generations, and that we're just not built there just isn't enough there aren't enough permits for like high density housing because all of the easy land for low density housing has already been taken. And so there's really not enough construction to keep up with demand. And again, a lot of this is anecdotal, and I definitely feel it when I am trying to pay rent as someone who, in my opinion, is, pretty, I would say I think I'm especially lucky to be in the career path that I'm in, to be able to afford the kind of housing that I have, when I know that many people our age can't do that. But I am also curious what the actual numbers say, because I think one thing that is often overlooked here is that there is a notion that individuals should be able to own their own homes, and that a single salary should be able to pay for a house. And to be honest, I don't know if that stacks up with historical precedent. Because I know that in other parts of the world, especially outside of the US, it can be more common for people to live with other members of their family, at least until they get married, or when they have enough saved that they can afford housing. Whereas I think the paradigm in the US is that young people are expected to go off into the world and to be able to pay for their own lifestyles individually as soon as they get out of college or as soon as they get out of high school. And I think that that probably exacerbates the stress that young Americans feel about trying to own their own homes, because it feels so financially out of reach because they have not been set up for success. But again, I will, I will default to what the facts say. I think everything I've just mentioned is largely anecdotal and based on, again, the vibes that I have felt from people our age.
Yeah, I, after hearing that, have a number of points that I heard that I would like to push back on. Not going to do that
Yeah.
right now. I'm going to save that for later. But that is generally the discourse that I hear on housing online, is that most of it is based off of vibes. There are occasional references to facts, but if you're looking at it from the long-term historical perspective, it's difficult to truly get a grasp of what the experience is like and has been like over the years. So, when you say you want to get into the facts, what do you mean by that? What facts are you looking for?
So some evidence I would be looking for is the average salary for the given age group against the average home price. Or I guess maybe median values on these would be better. So like median salary for someone in their late 20s, early 30s,
Okay, so you're looking for,
and then median home value.
say those again.
So median salary for ages, say 25 to 35, and then median home price for, I don't know, if it was possible to get it, like specifically median home price for like a two-bedroom house, 2 bed 1 bath house. something like that.
The American dream.
Right. 2 bed, 1 bath, 2 car garage, front yard, backyard. The works.
$40,000 in credit card debt. There we go.
So I think that would be a good reference point. I think in addition, something that I've seen used as a metric is the liquidity of housing. So I don't know what the exact units would be, but something along the lines of like the amount of housing on the market in a location at a given time. So, for example, in the city of Los Angeles, how many bedrooms worth of real estate is on the market, either for rentals or for purchase?
Unfortunately, that number has dropped pretty substantially over the last week.
By approximately 500 homes, yeah. 520.
Yeah.
Shout out to all those people. Sorry your home got burned down. Oof. Okay. Okay, so Austin, how would you go about finding these numbers and putting it into a assessment of whether or not the claim that
Yeah.
housing is more
So
expensive nowadays is true or not?
so my primary source to get some of this data would probably be from governmental sources. I have found those to be the most accurate for data like this, or the most consistent. So, any website.gov that might have some data sets along these lines.
Okay.
But Austin, what would you say to those that just call you a sheep? The government makes up these numbers. Inflation isn't real.
Well, I think
what would be your response to that?
so. My response is that I think the government, in my opinion, has at least as much credibility as any other organization that would be attempting to gather this type of data. I think that the government has the best likelihood of having accurate data because of the expansive coverage of the data that they can gather as the federal government, and the aligned incentive that they have to provide unbiased data to the public.
Okay, sheeple.
Okay.
Um,
So, Sheeple, moving forward, what I'm going to do is, do you have a ChatGPT subscription, Austin?
I do not.
You do not. Okay, I do. So I have access to all of the fun, fancy things that they can do. What I'm going to do is share my screen, and you are going to help me type in some prompts and try to get the data that you want. Yes, that's what we're going to do. So
All
Chris and
right.
I did this beforehand and got some interesting data out of it. So I want you to assist me here. Okay, so let's try to get some of this information. Please give me a table that includes the
I just want to point out for the viewers, John was not saying please and thank you when no one was recording, just for the record.
okay.
You're very verbally abusive to ChatGPT, which is a critical part of getting maximum performance out of it, unfortunately.
Prompt engineering.
Which trained on real humans.
Like, give me the data.
Okay, so let's start with that.
I was
Is
gonna
this-
say, like, what time span?
Yeah, great question. What time span do you want? So we just asked it for median information. It gave us from 2024 approximately $57,000 according to Capital.
Yeah.
Whether or not we trust that, not entirely sure. Let's not validate it quite yet.
Yeah.
What
So-
information do you want out of this?
I would say the data points that we discussed on a yearly basis for the last 30 years.
Okay. So, give me a table that includes the last 30 years of median salary data for 25 to 35-year-olds. Why are we focusing on 25 to 35-year-olds, Austin?
So that would be because the concerns that were raised in that subreddit, I would expect come from people who are kind of first time home buyers. So largely people in that age range, or like what historically, anecdotally, was the first time home buyer age range.
Okay. Uh,
I guess that's another point that we could validate. Like, is that historically accurate? Because I think once you own real estate that is producing that curve of returns, then I think it becomes a lot easier to hop from the home that you own to something
So
elsewhere.
I think you just made a really interesting statement that I think is worth kind of honing in on. This concept of like this asset that has this rate of return. So like there's kind of some implicit assumption there that like
Yeah.
real estate is matching, if not exceeding, the returns of the overall market
Right.
slash growth of the economy.
Right.
Is that like a perspective that you would agree on in isolation?
Um, yes, with a number of caveats, of course. I think that the number, like historically, I do think that Americans have treated real estate as like an appreciating asset, um, as an expectation, even when the actual value of those homes is not really appreciating. Like owning a home and just sitting on it should not net you 10% returns every year for year on year over the next like 10, 20 years. But that's exactly what we see in the market, is that like you can sit on a home, do absolutely nothing to it, and it will just continue to grow in value.
Well,
wow, there are a
there's
lot
a-
of statements there that I want to
I know.
rip apart.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so my understanding is that compared to the general stock market, putting money into a house as in just real estate and watching the number go up, as opposed to just putting it into the stock market, the stock market wins every time. It's going to grow a lot faster.
Okay.
There is the
Yeah,
caveat that
that
if you
helps.
like buy a home and start collecting rent on it, that maybe the numbers change pretty significantly there on how much you gain. So like if you're saving $4,000, $2,000 a month on rent from
Mhm.
owning a home, and then you also see that as an appreciating asset, my numbers there might be a little bit worse.
Mhm.
But you're not going to be seeing 10% returns on an
Yeah.
annual
Oh,
basis
yeah.
from the real estate market.
That 10% may be excessive.
So what's really funny is there's a nuanced caveat here that makes some of Austin's statements actually surprisingly true, in my opinion, right? So I'll start with the things that disagree with Austin, right? Which John didn't mention, which is just the cost of owning a home. It's very expensive to own a home in terms of maintenance, taxes, um, like general upkeep, right? You'll easily spend like I remember my mother growing up. She was like, oh, basically about 1% of the cost of the house per year at minimum is like what it costs to maintain, and that's if you're already doing a lot of the stuff yourself, right? So there's lots of costs. However, there is nothing that the average American can access more leverage on than real estate. Like any American can walk into any bank and get like a 20x leverage position on their home by getting a mortgage with 5% down, which is like what a lot of young people do, right? And on top of that, the government subsidizes the like mortgage interest rates by quite a bit, both on the tax side where you don't pay taxes, like you get to deduct all the interest you pay, and the fact that they like keep the rates low. So like there is kind of a weird subsidy thing there, but that's a whole other topic we can like circle back on later. I don't want to distract from the Chat GPT fun.
Mhm.
So I really like this this conversation topic of like, should a 25-year-old be able to own a home? Like, is that something that we should be like optimizing for? Or should we just say, hey, like homes are expensive, like you may not be able to afford a home until later in life? Like, what's the right thing for like the regular American person?
I don't have a very strong opinion on whether or not a person, given their age, should or should not be able to own a home. I don't think that makes much sense to talk about. I think what does make sense is whether or not they should be able to afford housing, like if it's rentals, if it's buying a home, whatever that situation may be. Uh, I think the default that a lot of people are talking about here is it affordable to live in the United States nowadays, given
So,
salaries?
okay, I think that's an interesting that's an interesting framing to the problem. I'd be happy to continue with that, but I do want to maybe come up with some better definitions about what that means. For example, is it considered affordable housing if you live with three other people in like a 3 or 4 bedroom house?
If you're like a single man and you have your own room and maybe share a bathroom with one other guy, like potentially. If you have like a family
Yeah.
of five, like no, right? Like it
Yeah.
depends. Because I think one thing that's kind of interesting is we're all fortunate enough to like work in tech, have reasonable salaries, and yet none of us own our home, right? Like we all rent. I live in
Yeah.
SoCal, you guys in the Pacific Northwest. Um, and like for us, we almost, and I don't know, put words to your mouth. I kind of shrug my shoulders. I'm like, I can't afford to buy a house, right? And that's even like being someone that's fortunate enough to have income, and that's
Yeah.
in a very expensive place. But like, I guess for me, I don't feel held back where I can't buy a house, but I feel fortunate where I can afford the cost of living to rent a house, right? So that's kind of what Austin's saying, where it's like, or what John's saying, where it's like, can you afford the cost of living? But like, I guess for you guys, like, do you consider the fact that you don't own any property, is that like a negative? Do you feel behind compared to other peers? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I would not say I feel behind compared to peers. I specifically am a renter because it is at the moment cheaper if you go and plug it into some online calculators. My favorite one is the New York Times rent versus buy website, and there was like a page they made in 2014. Let me see if I can go share that. Oh, you need a New York Times subscription to do it.
I know you've showed it to me in the past.
Yeah, it's my favorite one.
Welcome to the new internet, John, where every website needs a subscription.
Oh my god. Whee! Okay, there we go. Oh no, I do need the subscription. Well, okay, that's not happening. It used to not have that. I used to be able to just go and look at it.
Monetize, monetize, monetize.
They got us. Um, but yeah, what I really like about that New York Times calculator is that it shows the difference between renting and buying on a long-term basis, given your expected inflation, uh, wages, wage growth, real estate growth. It has some default numbers that you can use, but you can also put in your own numbers and adjust based on your risk level, uh, and then how long you're expecting to own the home. So, um, but yeah, I would not say that I feel held back at all by renting instead of purchasing a home.
I would say I think it would be a while before I felt like purchasing a home would be a good financial choice for me. But so purchasing a home, I don't feel in my immediate future, but I do feel comfortable being able to afford rent month to month, year to year, for example.
But like,
I do.
yeah, sorry.
Mhm.
So, putting the affordability aside, right? Like, do you want to own a home? Like John, it kind of sounds like John's kind of a renter by choice, where he's like, all these like costs associated with it. I might move, blah blah blah. It's kind of a choice. Would you say for you it's a choice, or would you say for you it's like a financial restriction more than a choice?
Um, so me and my partner have moved homes almost every year for the last like 6 years. I think we're still not at a place where we know where we want to be long term. So I think renting is an easy way to give us that flexibility. I think if we had decided that where we are now is where we would like to stay, then I would feel somewhat restricted in being able to buy a home. I would like to be the owner of the place that I live in. I feel like there are a lot of restrictions with renting. But like,
For instance, your dryer is currently broken and you really have no power to
and I
fix
have
it.
to go to the
So
laundromat. Right,
you're
right.
going to the
It's like
laundromat to dry
you,
your clothes.
yeah, and like I'm
Which a lot of
responsible. There are parts of being a renter that really suck, and owning your home just like it has other problems, but you become kind of the master of your domain. And I think that is really appealing to me and to a lot of people. And so it's unfortunate that a lot of people feel like that is out of reach for them, even into the long term. But I guess that's I don't know if that's the direction we wanted to head with this conversation. If we wanted to talk more about the general housing affordability.
I think pessimism does really well with the algorithm, so we should be as pessimistic as possible.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. I guess yeah, that was kind of my vibe check for you guys on whether you even wanted to own
Yeah.
homes, like how you felt about it.
Like I really would like to own a home, but I think I don't know. It depends on knowing where I want to live long term, uh, and then knowing that like it is like a life milestone achievement for a reason. It's not an easy
Yeah.
thing to do.
Well, I think respectfully, I might push back and say like, if you've been moving every year for the past however many years, then like it's really not necessarily a financial restriction. Like it's expensive, and it'd be nice if they were cheaper. But like the reason you don't own a home is because you're young and you're moving and you
Mm-hmm.
don't know where you want to be. Which I think
Yeah,
is something that applies to like a lot of young people, right?
yeah,
Especially those that don't have kids and don't have families and stuff yet.
yeah. I agree.
But yeah, we are kind of pivoting. Sorry, John. I'll hand the reins back over to you.
All right, okay. Uh, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go back to ChatGPT, and we are going to use this amazing, powerful AI tool to help us dig into this investigation of
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Sure.
is has housing affordability changed significantly? Um, the general discourse is that housing is significantly more expensive nowadays, and it is unfair to younger generations that they cannot afford a home. So we want to challenge that assumption and dig into it a little more critically than what general discourse would have you do. So um, some of the ideas that we put out are checking the median salary for 25 to 35-year-olds. Uh, I don't think that's a useful statistic unless we're comparing it to the salaries of older people,
Mm-hmm.
which, given this data, it looks like for 25 to 34-year-olds in the US, it's approximately okay. So median annual earnings for 25 to 34-year-olds in 2024, according to Capital One, is 57,000, and then for 60, it looks like the highest earning cohort is 68,000. So
Mm-hmm.
that's like a 15-20% diff. Uh, I think what we can do then is keep in our minds that there's a about 10 to 15% diff between these cohorts. Um, so let's put that in our back pocket. And then I think we can simplify out the age assumption. Um, okay, so then the next thing that you want to do is find the median home price for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. Okay, so as of September 2023, 400K. Differs by area. What are the historical costs since, let's go 1970 and see if it can generate some data for us. Please give me the data for every year.
Do we want to adjust for inflation?
Good point.
Or we just adjust for the, I guess, because ideally I think it's meaningful to compare the house price versus salaries of the time, but I think it'll be hard to do a direct comparison. So I think the best would be to do an adjustment for inflation for both the salary and for the house price.
Okay. Yeah, so let's do that. Let's ask it to adjust for inflation and give us the data for every year.
Also adjust for inflation.
Also, like this link, don't quit your day job, as you literally just quit your day job.
If you want to buy a home, don't quit your day job.
Yeah.
Luckily, yeah.
Okay. So it gave us this big table. It adjusted the price for inflation. This makes absolutely no sense.
Okay.
That data does not make sense. Let's look at the code.
I would say that's average ChatGPT quality right there.
The fuck? Consumer. They're basing it off of the consumer price index. Oh my god, this is horrific.
Interesting.
Nope. Don't calculate the inflation yourself. Find an already inflation adjusted home price graph / table from a reputable source.
If you say from Fred, do you think you'll get it from Fred?
There you go. Oh, Fred.
Oh, nice.
Okay, well, it linked it to me. So let's. That's just the Case-Shiller index. I don't think we want the Case-Shiller index.
It's not inflation adjusted.
Yeah.
We can always do the inflation adjusting ourselves with
So
the magic
close.
of ChatGPT.
Yeah, we don't want the Case-Shiller index because the Case-Shiller index started. Why is this only going to 1990? Oh, because. Wow, this is horrific.
If you click max up above,
Max, that's what I want.
it may only go to 87.
Well, I thought it started. Oh, it. Okay, this is all backfilled data. Yeah, so the Case-Shiller index starts at January 2000 and sets it at 100, and then adjusts the number as you go.
So since then, houses are roughly 3.2 times as expensive.
Yes. All right. Yeah. Let me get that.
Also, make sure to edit out the how to podcast guide when you're editing this podcast.
We'll try. We'll just leave it in. I'll leave it in. It'll be great. It'll be incredible. Oh, I hope I have nothing else embarrassing in here.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Oh yeah. No,
Full care
I saw
symbols
it.
guide. I like that.
How to play pickleball.
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty
Cost
embarrassing.
of infrequent car ownership.
CSV data extraction? You don't know CSVs, John? What the hell?
I don't know how CSVs work.
That's funny because I have a CSV to JSON tab open right now on Stack Overflow.
Yikes. Okay. Give me an
Someone's
array of the inflation-adjusted U.S. home prices since 1950. Let's do that. This does not account for two-bed, one-bath. I think that data might be difficult to get. No. Give me an array.
Wow, you're really abusing this AI, aren't you?
Yeah. That's the only
This
way
is
you
the
can get it to, like,
dictionary.
The verbal abuse works.
It works. You just have to be mean to it.
Or I guess this is an array of dictionaries. I see. That qualifies.
This number looks wrong.
So it's
Tell it looks wrong and ask it to back it up.
This is definitely not accurate.
Yeah. This data looks wrong. Please use real data.
This is just turning into like an anti-ad for ChatGPT.
There we go. Apologies. Here's
Mm. Oh yeah.
raw. No. Use real data and include all years. Let's be nice and do 1970. This is inflation adjusted price. This is just the Case-Shiller index again. What is this data?
ChatGPT is like, I made it up.
God damn it. How did we get it to This is
This is my personal favorite part, is that it will never hallucinate the same way twice.
yeah. Okay.
It's a bespoke experience every time.
The vibe checks out. Median home price 100K in 1995 up to 400-ish K nowadays. Inflation adjusted, that would be 200K back in the day. So Austin, have you used ChatGPT much before, or do you just not use
I
it?
have. Yeah.
It is
Like I have used it. It's great for the initial exploration, but I think that LLMs are not sophisticated enough to answer more complex queries like this and to jump through too many hoops, because I think it's too chaotic. It's too easy to go off the rails. And what I have found is that a lot of these extra features that they're building in, like adding this type of like, I don't know if this is Pythonic or like Python executions, or like pulling data from outside sources. Like it's all really interesting, but it's still very chaotic. And it's dangerous because it looks right if you're not looking closely, but you know, it's really hard to catch some of the mistakes that it makes if you're not familiar with the domain that it's discussing.
Something I might suggest, John, is if you go to the Fred website and just download the CSVs, and then give ChatGPT the CSVs and say, use this data, do this, it might help.
Yeah, let's try that. Okay, so after much ado, we finally found a data source that looks somewhat reputable. This DQYDJ that gives inflation adjusted and non-inflation adjusted median home prices in the US. ChatGPT was having a very hard time finding this data. So we just downloaded the CSV and loaded it into here. Now we have a graph that is the exact graph that was being shown beforehand. So
You know what? So I'm going to go grab my laptop, and I'm going to start competing with John without using any AI. And we're going to see who wins.
I love that idea. It's great.
I have to get my laptop because I don't know how fucking Windows works at all. I can't even like run a Python file on Windows. It's embarrassing.
So like basically, given this graph, which is median home prices over time, now what we want to do is this graph would suggest, oh, homes are getting more expensive over time. They have almost doubled in price since 1950-ish, 1980, really almost to 1990. Like mid 80s, they have doubled in price since then. That's what this graph would have us believe. Now what we want to do is compare that to the average income. So, have you looked at the amount that a mortgage interest rate impacts home cost in terms of monthly payments?
No, but I can imagine it's pretty large.
Yeah. The impact is significant. So yes, what we should do is try to incorporate that data. The change in monthly home cost, if you go to like a mortgage calculator and you put in a $400,000 home today, if you want to buy that, 20% down payment, 30% loan term, 7% interest, and you calculate it. This gives you a graph of your like monthly payment, which would be $2,000.
Mm-hmm.
If you decrease this to 3% and you calculate it, it goes all the way down to $1,300. That's like a very substantial difference.
Yeah.
Now, if you go look at 30-year mortgage, rates over time. Um,
See, that link is already purple.
yeah, way back in the 80s, it was all the way up to 18%. So if you plug 18% into this, your mortgage payment goes up to $4,800. That's a massive difference. It over double
Mm-hmm.
how much you're paying in monthly payments for a 30-year loan.
Yeah.
So that data is very, very important to include. So what we should do is try to include that. Um,
So that's like trying to figure out the actual monetary cost for the loan to acquire the value of the house.
yes. So here is 30-year loan rate, average per
Mm-hmm.
year.
See the spike around 1985 and then
Yep,
drops
this
around
looks
after that.
pretty
Yep.
accurate. 16, 17%.
1980, 85, yeah.
It was at historic lows right during the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of the pandemic, 3%, and now it's at 6-ish percent.
Yep.
So,
Infinite QE.
yeah,
Got that. Yeah.
during the beginning of your loan, you will almost entirely be paying off the interest of your loan, and then near the very end is when you start actually killing your principal, the
Yeah.
balance of your loan. So the graph that we're trying to get here is basically combining your expected cost of a house, might cost $200,000, might cost $1 million. What's the median? Combine that with your percentage of the loan and how much that would impact your monthly payments. So this graph is suggesting that it was really high during the 1980s when the interest rates were high, got really low after the financial crash in 2008, and then it has jumped significantly back up. Let's go look at the code and see if this is accurate. Looking at the code, so yeah, that's like the typical equation
Mm-hmm.
that they use to calculate a monthly interest rate payment or monthly mortgage payment. Merges in the data, plots it. So that looks about accurate.
So what do we take away from this?
Homes are quite expensive now.
Yes, as expensive as they were around 1980.
Yeah.
But that was only since the pandemic. I've heard, to be fair, I've heard this discourse even coming out of the Great Recession when that wasn't really the case at the time. It's only really become the case in the last what is that, 2 to 3 years. So it is true now that home prices have soared significantly relative to median salaries.
Right. Just short the housing market, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when you zoom out, right, like if we assume that rates decline, so like there's two ways that housing can get cheaper. Like housing prices get cheaper or rates come down, right? And you look at the 80s where there's the previous big spike. Like I wonder which one happened or if like both happened. John has abandoned us.
Oh,
Anything
you're
goes.
not there.
Free for all.
And now for the next segment on best cooking tips for chocolate chip cookies.
Ooh. I mean, I would listen to that.
The secret is extra egg yolks because it gives it a kind of a fluffier, juicier consistency.
I do like juicy cookies. If I had to pick one adjective to describe cookies, it'd be juicy.
But the problem is if you have the egg white with it too, then it makes it more cakey.
Boo.
So
We
only
hate
doing
cake.
the exactly. So only doing the yolk makes it moist but not spongy.
Cookie facts with Austin.
Yeah.
I am back. Yeah. Yeah. So Austin, does this align with your expectation for what this graph would look like?
No, it does not.
How does it not?
So I was expecting that it would I guess something like I pre 2000, all bets are off. I have no idea what that graph would look like, but I was expecting that post 2000 there would be a more consistent and kind of linear increase, I guess. Whereas here it seems like from 2000 to 2020, it actually did kind of stabilize and even go lower. And it's only been in the last 2 to 3 years when it's really spiked. Um, which, as I mentioned, to me, it feels like it hasn't fit the anecdotes of what I've heard online and from people our age. But I guess if we're going back to the idea of like, is an economic collapse happening now? It's like, well, first off, I think that's a bit uh, excessive to call it a full economic collapse, but I do think that like the um, the sacrifices that our generation are making to purchase homes right now is the highest it's been in the last 40 years, according to this data.
So, Chris, how's your local code going?
Um, I got frustrated fixing the plotting syntax and gave up.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Uh-huh.
It's like at least ChatGPT gives us something to work with.
I've tried plotting the dictionary, and instead of plotting, the numbers versus the date, it was like plotting the dates. So it just, was complete garbage because it was like plotting strings or whatever. And I was like, yep, I'm done. So do you think OpenAI should be worth $1 trillion?
Do you think Nvidia is worth? How much is it worth now?
Oh my gosh. It's over $1 trillion, right?
Nvidia is like 3 trillion, maybe 4.
Hell
It's crazy.
yeah.
So I think the ultimate conclusion is that ChatGPT is both great and sucks. There's more to the story than just looking at home costs and mortgage rates.
Is the economy collapsing, John?
The
What's the answer?
economy is probably not collapsing, but things are more expensive and people are angry that costs have shot up drastically over the past 5 years for housing.
And eggs.
Eggs, don't forget the eggs.
Don't forget
Especially
the eggs.
with the bird flu, egg
Guns,
price,
ammo, eggs.
bird flu.
Are you in on egg futures yet, Chris?
But yes. Okay. I'm going to
Yeah.
stop